Steve.
Artur, good to see ya.
Hi,
So
hi.
here we have people coming in. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Let's wait a little bit because there was a long waiting list here. So I'm going to just remove the waiting room. I think that Alison is the last one in coming in. Okay, so welcome, everybody. Yes. There is no one now in the waiting room, so we are good to start. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm super happy to have these two awesome physicists here with us. I'm going to pin them so as we can see them big. And yeah, they don't know each other, so I'm very glad to introduce you to the other. Steve, Artur, I think you're going to find like somehow like a twin soul or something like that, because you both talk about the same topics. I've heard you talking about at least some topics in common, and I think that with the same perspective. So I was thrilled to see that there are more people out there talking about things that for me are really, really important, because I really believe that science has been somehow, if you allow me to use that word, hijacked. And we need to, well, to start again putting on top of the table the real knowledge. So I'm going to just be a moderator here. I want you both to have a nice and spontaneous conversation. I gave you like some questions that I think can be interesting, because what I perceive, and this is one of the reasons why I decided to do this conversation between you both, is because, well, I met Stephen in an event in Confluence, and we were listening to other people, and I know Artur since I know how many decades, many years we've been friends, and I enjoy a lot his knowledge. And I thought, wow, I think that people are kind of missing some points or confusing certain words. And we are using scalar waves and plasma and quantum energy and ether in a really messed up way. So my purpose in this conversation is we can set the basis for a knowledge in which then everybody can go deeper if you want. But at least that we can agree in certain definitions or ideas of what those words mean. So thank you, Steve, for being here. Hello, how are you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm doing great, actually. Yeah, it's been really nice weather here, summer solstice vibes, and yeah, it's been a lovely week. And I've been quite excited about this, actually. I've been doing a lot of research this week, diving deep into ether and the theory of ether and the elements, and yeah, just getting more knowledge about all that in preparation for this. So yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Artur. Welcome here.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. Adam, Steve. Having the pleasure to meet you. But I think going to be a nice conversation. I hope that we can enjoy this conversation, and we're going to study, I guess, 2 centuries of misinterpretations about mainstream physicists, and something that started by the beginning of the 19th century, but then came up 1887 experiment, Michaelson-Morley experiment, which basically changed a lot of things. Before, there were Maxwell equations that were misunderstood. And after Tesla, which is another scientist who was completely misunderstood, and by the latest 3 decades, I guess, or 4 decades, there were completely reconsideration and undercover the Tesla's original insights and discoveries about scalar waves, longitudinal waves. There have been given many different names for the same thing, and well, I hope that today we're gonna have a nice conversation and a nice travel in all these particular aspects that there are a lot of people in the internet speaking about these matters, and we will try to give some light to this particular science. So let's have a nice time and enjoy this
Enjoy the
solstice.
show. This is really enjoy the show. So thank you very much. I want just to say that we are going to have this conversation, and then if someone wants to ask questions, we are going to let it for the end, okay? Because otherwise we are going to be interrupting. So the idea here is to start from the beginning. So I want to ask you both, if we can start with Steve, what is Aether? Aether, that I spelled that wrong in English, I'm sorry. Because I put the publicity with the ether without the A, because in Spanish doesn't exist that. So I thought that was just a fancy way looking Greek
Yeah.
of spelling the ether. So Steve, what's the ether?
Excuse me. So, yeah, so I was a bit pedantic about the spelling because, well, ether without the A is actually a chemical solvent. You might have heard of it on the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. There's a scene in there where they are, taking ether as a drug, and it's a pretty messed up scene. But that's where I first heard about ether. So this is ether without the A, which is a chemical solvent made from distilling alcohol with sulfuric acid. I think that's so that's the chemical ether. But then ether with the A is what they call the quintessence, and this goes back to ancient Greece and really to all ancient cultures, as far as I can tell. They would have different words for it. So what is it fundamentally? Well, I understand it as a fluid, and in some ways it's like a perfect fluid, like the perfect fluid, the thinnest fluid, if you like. So if you think of like fluid has a viscosity, and the higher the viscosity, the thicker the fluid. So, for example, with water, water is quite viscous, but if we spin it, enough, we can create a vortex in the water by giving it a good stir, and that vortex will actually sustain for a period of time. Say 30 seconds or something. And the thicker, the more viscous a fluid is, the less able it is to sustain a vortex. So like if you have treacle, for example, and you try to spin treacle in a vortex, right, and you let it go, it's not gonna, the vortex is just gonna stop like within a few seconds because it's too viscous. And so there's in fluid dynamics, the theory of fluid dynamics suggests that if a fluid has an infinitely low viscosity, then it could sustain vortices indefinitely, potentially forever. And this is really what the ether is, as I understand it mathematically. It's a fluid of infinitely low viscosity, and so therefore is able to sustain these vortices, which we experience as matter. So ether, is a fluid that fills all of space. So unlike modern science, where we're taught that space is empty, or rather, there's atoms separated by empty space, is the model of matter that we're taught in physics. But in ether theory, which precedes all that, the space is actually filled at every level with this fine fluid, which is able to penetrate and flow through all things, all matter. Is that a good start?
Yes, it's a good start. So Artur, how would
That's
you
incredible
describe
start. That's incredible star, and Steve have summarized it perfectly, and it will be very difficult to say something better, which is been perfect, this presentation. I would like to add that in the ancient concept of the fifth element, it's called the ether. There were four ethers: the ether of fire, air, water, and earth. And that was related to meaning that fire is hot and at the same time is dry, and water is wet and cold, etc. So in that ancient concept of the four ethers and the join of these four ethers came the ether, the fifth element, and that's the ancient concept or classical concept that when by the beginning of the 19th century, it showed up that there were a relationship between electricity and magnetism. That was something that discovered Ampere, but several Italian scientists knew that from the latest of the 18th century. There were a lot of controversies between the fact that if magnetism and electricity have a certain kind of relationship, and Ampere discovered that that was true. There were a relationship, and that established the Ampere's law, which is, by the way, the basis of DC current. And then came up Faraday to say that, well, an electric a changing in the electric field can generate a magnetic field, and then a magnetic field can generate an electric field. And well, from these two laws, Ampere's laws and Faraday's law, it came up the necessity to integrate this electricity and magnetism, and they came up Maxwell, who by the second third of the 19th century considered the possibility that we can write several equations that can describe the unification between magnetism and electricity. And then it came up the fact that we discovered that light was an electromagnetical wave, and it have a spectrum, and then came up Earth. We discovered the Hertzian wave. And when Hertz discovered the Hertzian wave, Maxwell asked him, that's the story, I don't know if this is true, but it is said that Maxwell asked him, well, this kind of equation, the wave have you discovered, are there transverse or are they longitudinal, in the sense that by those days, they knew that sound was a longitudinal wave. So I have been summarizing a lot of physical aspects, and they decided that electromagnetical wave were transverse, which is part true, but part inaccurate with the Maxwell equations. And it seems like there were some parts of the equations that were reduced to zero, and they should not be reduced to zero, in particular the longitudinal aspect of the wave, meaning by that pure electric wave, longitudinal pure electric wave, and longitudinal pure magnetic wave. And so we arrived to the 19th century, the latest decade of the 19th century, and in 1891, it showed up Tesla, discovering the Tesla's coils, and he discovered that at high voltage and high frequency, meaning the high frequency produced by the spare gap, or in Spanish is a chispero, it showed up that when you use high voltages and high frequencies, there's something that cannot be described in Maxwell equation, and it seems that there's a certain kind of waves that penetrates everything and have a particular biological
component.
Yes.
Or effect.
Yeah, we have a compatibility, biological compatibility. And this is something that Tesla himself, when he was in Paris by 1892, transmitted to a man named Jacques-Arsène d'Arsenval, and that was the beginning of the high voltage, high frequency electrotherapy that by the middle of the 30s was very expanded in France, with figures like d'Arsenval himself, but also George Lakowski and many others. And then it came up the fact that electromagnetism can be 100% biocompatibility. And it shows up that this kind of electricity is not precisely described in books. So till now, we still have to reconsider the equations, which are not complete, and the original Tesla's discoveries, in particular 4 patents in which Tesla described that he had discovered another kind of electricity. And that's, and in particular, what is our relationship with this, with the ether? Well, the fact is that we can, the ether, I understand it as Steve have clearly stated, as a fluid, a perfect fluid, and we can perturbate this fluid in different ways. We can compress it, and we have dielectricity, what we have in a capacity. We can expand it, and that is magnetism. So I always say to my students the same example. If you are in water, like a fish, if it's quiet, does not know that he's in a medium, but when he started to move, he started to see that there's a pressure in the sense where he's going, and a lack of pressure in the tail, as well as it happens when I move my hand. When I move my hand, I notice that there's a pressure in this zone and lack of pressure in the other side, and vice versa if I move on the other side. So what we know is that this fluid can be detected, and the properties of gravity, magnetism, and electricity is the way to penetrate or disturb this medium, which is omnipresent, perfect fluid, etc.
So
So
let me stop you here, Artur, just to
yeah,
clarify a little bit. We are describing the ether as a substance, and this substance, the way, depending on how you perturb, disturb, or excite that
yeah,
substance, you can have the different forces that we observe in nature and that we have observed them as disconnected, like electricity and magnetism. Then we know theoretically that they are connected
yeah,
because there are some laws and they tell you the right-hand law, and we know
yeah.
all these theories that behind that, but somehow for us as an experience are disconnected, and the gravity. So you are saying that with the ether we could find a way to understand our reality in a much more connected way. You were talking about the different equations and the different, and how when they started discovering the electricity, they decided that that was going to be just one kind of electricity, but in fact, there are at least two kinds of electricity. One of them is the one we know, that is the one we use in our appliances, but the other one is what we call the scalar or the Tesla electricity. Am I right? Am I summarizing that right?
Yeah, you summarized it perfectly.
Okay, so just let me ask you one thing before we continue that way, is why, if the ether was something that was known and was described until 200 years ago or 300 years ago, what happened that suddenly someone said the ether doesn't exist? When it was something that was known, what happened? So as science, if that happens, but I perceive that it happened, that science some moment decided that there was no ether. What
well,
and
well, before I reply to that question, I what I want to express is that actually we have not in my opinion, a perfect description of the ether. We don't have a theory that describes perfectly the kind of ether. All of these theories, meaning by that the theory of Eric Dollar, and it's my opinion, and Tom Bearden, and all these people who have studied these matters in particular, they have their theory, which is quite approximate to the reality, but we don't have a theory that describes perfectly the ether, and there are a lot of things that we don't know actually this present moment. But there's things that we do know, and if we compare it with mainstream physics that I learned in the college, and so we have advanced, hemos avanzado, we have
yeah,
made great
we
improves but we don't have a perfect theory. The other aspect, and replying to that question, is that, well, in 1887, when Michaelson-Morley experiment was done, the fact is that by those present moments, not everyone was agree with the conclusion of that experiment. And the fact is that Tesla's, for instance, was probably the greatest oppositor to this idea. Because if we consider that the ether exists in the, I'm not going to explain the Michelson-Morley experiments because that will take me a lot of time. But if anyone wants to know a little bit more about these experiments, I suggest that he look for many YouTube videos that describe this experiment. But there's a lot of things or considerations that we have to take into account when we want to analyze this experiment, that if we accept the idea that the ether exists, then it came up the fact that the altitude of the experiment should have to take a relevant. And then if we make the experiment closer to the equator or in the North Pole, then we have to add the ether described by the compression of the ether described by the rotation of the Earth, which is, by the way, 0.5 kilometers per second. So that should have to have an affection to the ether, meaning that it's not the same to do this equation, to this experiment in the equator or in California. And I'm going to explain why I say California, because there was a man who was the president of the Astronomical Society, Dayton Miller, who in 1825 and 1826, he made up more than 10,000 hours with a beta interferometer, which 64 meters long, of which and the Michaelson-Morley original experiment only had 16 meters of that was pretty well described by James DeMeo in one of his papers. So what I want to say is that there were another scientists who, with better interferometers, more accurate, and considering the fact that the ether could exist, make experiments in different positions of the Earth, and considering the fact that the Earth is rotation, and at the same time there's a translation movement of the Earth around the Sun. And all these matters have to be considered in the sense that when the Earth rotates in the same way it's translated, which happens 12 hours per day, you have a maximum in the ether wind. And then when the rotation of the Earth goes to the opposite, then you have a minimum. And that was exactly what Dayton Miller detected, and afterwards was detected by another scientist who made up better interferometers. So it's untrue, absolutely untrue, that when in the 1887 Michaelson-Morley did that experiment, all the physicists forgive the idea of the ether. That's absolutely untrue. And there were a lot of scientists who could still consider that experiment was done in a very rudimentary way, and it needs to take more accurate measures in order to discard or consider the idea of the ether. So I don't know if Steve wants to say something
Steve, what
about
do you
this.
think about why the ether has been dismissed?
Well, excuse me. Yeah, I was talking with an engineer the other day, a guy who works in the oil industry, and he was talking to me about all this stuff. And he said, from an engineering point of view, he said he'd always noticed that whenever you see a picture of Tesla, he's always in a lab. And whenever you see a picture of Einstein, he's always on a podium or in front of a blackboard. And it's kind of interesting, but that's kind of what happened there. I mean, practical scientists understood the ether. People who actually did practical science, like, it was understood right up until the 19th century, say. And with the Michaelson-Morley experiment, they set out to measure ether drag, right? So the whole concept of ether drag was well understood. They expected to observe ether drag when they did the experiment. So they have the light beams being split and then recombined later, and they were supposed to observe a fringe shift. And as Artur said, they actually claimed they didn't get any result at all. They declared that there was a null result, but actually they didn't get a null result. They measured an ether drag of about 8 to 10 kilometers per second. Now they were expecting to get something much higher than that, and so they dismissed it as an experimental error, and they said they got a null result, but it wasn't a null result. And then that result ended up being consistent with the Dayton Miller's results as well. Dayton Miller did way more experiments at different altitudes, and measured this ether wind, as they'd call it. So now this is where it gets a bit tricky, because it depends on your model of the cosmos, exactly how you interpret this information. So I've been a globe skeptic for many years now, and I believe in a stationary Earth. So I don't believe the Earth is rotating. So I believe what they measured was in fact the ether wind. That the Earth is stationary, and the ether circulates around the wind. Circulates around in a vortex, and he found, for example, it was going faster higher up and slower closer to the Earth. So basically, the ether was moving slowly, sort of through the Earth and close to the Earth's surface, but as you got higher up in altitude, it was moving faster. So there's, you see, the Michaelson-Morley experiment, they assumed the Earth is rotating, and they never questioned that assumption. So they're putting down this ether wind effect to the fact that the Earth is moving, whereas I would interpret it the other way. The Earth is stationary, and the ether is actually swirling around in a vortex. So yeah, so it really depends on your your cosmology here, how you would interpret that experiment.
But the important thing is that the denial of the ether, independently of how you interpret that in your own model, the denial of the ether comes because of an experiment that was wrongly done, and that some people decided that that was the truth. That is something that I've seen very often in science, and especially if then it comes someone that has a very big name, like Einstein, for example, that you were putting him in the stage and always with a theory, and then I think it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Einstein who said ether is not necessary, so we are going to just delete it from the picture. And when someone with this status like Einstein, that everybody believes everything he says just because it's that name, then we have a problem, because we are basing our science in an experiment that is wrong. That let's say, I don't know if I can say big words is wrong, but let's say is not accurate, with an interpretation that is also not accurate, and then it's been like the priest, the highest priest of the science is saying, yes, this is wrong, and this is the reason. Am I right? Why science is now not taking into account the ether, because Einstein said that it was not necessary. So then why are we going to use it?
Well, yeah, it's a shift in the theoretical aspect of the science, and in that paper by James DeMeo, where he talks about Dayton Miller's experiments, Dayton Miller did very extensive experiments, like really, really good work, and over a long period of time. And apparently now at the location where he did those experiments, the labs and everything, they've actually removed it, and there's a plaque with Einstein and Michelson's name on it, like where this guy did his work. It's like they completely wrote him out of history. I never heard of Dayton Miller until the last year or so, but he did actually very, very rigorous and thorough experiments, which in my view proved that there is an ether wind going around the Earth. Regardless of your model of the Earth, he detected the ether wind.
And when they say, because we are talking now we are in the beginning of the 20th century, when the physics start changing somehow a little bit, and we go to a little bit less materialistic with all the quantum physicists and all this. So then suddenly they invent, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm doing that from my perspective, and I think I'm not very objective, but the way I'm saying the things is like they invented like the 0-point energy, or the Dirac sea or ocean, I don't know how is it translated into English. Like they created like another ether to justify the things, instead of using the ether that was really there. I mean, these are things that from outside, I'm not an expert on that, but I was thinking, oh, so they just invented a new word for the same reality. Is that way, or they discover something different? Is this the 0-point energy and all this dark energy and all these things that are unknown and only the quantum physicists know because they are the smartest in the world? Only is exactly the same that the ether that we were dismissing?
Yeah, I think physicists have been hinting at the ether with lots of different names for it. So things like dark matter, the unified field, the quantum foam, the space-time continuum, you know, all this stuff that the physicists come up with that suggests that this kind of field that connects all things together. I feel like that they're just hinting back at the ether, which was, you know, known for thousands of years before they abandoned it. It's like they're coming back to it. They're realizing that they need it in order for their, you know, for their theories to work.
How do you see that, Artur?
Well, that's absolutely true, and we have to say that there's been more than one century in which the physicists continually faced with the idea of the ether, and they change the word sometimes in a ridiculous way because it seems like it's a taboo. It's like saying, you know, un taco, como se llama, ¿no?
Yeah, like a bad
It's,
word, like yeah.
it's a taboo. It's a complete taboo to say that word for a physicist. And I always ask to myself, why. And there's something that Steve have said that is quite important to remark is the fact that, as he said, with the idea of Einstein and Tesla, Tesla is in a laboratory, and Einstein was writing equations in a board. And that's true because there were another man named Charles Bartolus Steinmetz, who was the man who electrified completely the US, and he solved a very complex problem named the hysteresis of the transformers. He completely solved that problems, and now we have the electrical distributions for the great work that Charles Bartolus Steinmetz did, who was the main scientist of General Electric, and he was an incredible physicist, and he was an absolute 101% supporter of the idea of the ether. And he clearly said that the concept of electron, which is very useful for a chemistry in order to study the chemical reaction, is completely useless, and at least useless, or I will say absolutely, ¿cómo sería esto? Negativa, o sea, no inútil, sino negativa. O sea,
It's not useless, but it's negative. It's
it's
it
negative
goes against.
to understand the electricity. And we still, when we in the textbooks of science, we still say that the electricity is a movement of particles, by the
Electric
way,
charge.
electrons, and we do know that that is absolutely wrong. And so the empirical scientists who changed the world, meaning by that Tesla and Steinmetz and the others, were absolutely 101% defenders of the concept of the ether. And by contrary, the theoretical scientists, which I don't know exactly what they have given to the humanity, were opposers or at least skeptical with that idea. So who changed our society? Tesla and Darson and all these scientists, or Einstein? So
And the
that's a
theories.
controversy. And also I would like to add that besides this aspect of static Earth and flat Earth and all these concepts, um, I think that we all do know and we all agree with the fact that when you extract all the matter, you have a medium, and this medium have the same two properties that material medium had, which is a electric permeability and a magnetic permeability, and that arrive to the perfect when you extract all the matters and you are in a vacuum, and you measure that the speed of light is maximum when there's no matter, and that means that there should be a medium when you remove completely all the matter. So if all the mediums have properties, glass, water, air, etc., meaning electrical and magnetical properties, when you remove completely the matter, you still measure the same properties. So that's the 101% demonstration that before any kind of consideration, there should be a medium which is behind all the mediums. So matter is only a medium that is not perfect, it's not 100% with zero viscosity. And this medium, this materialistic medium, like wood or glass or water, whatever you consider, superimposed to or over another medium, which is the ether, the medium which is behind all the mediums. And that's what it's been always said. And even in Platonic science, in Newton will be agree at 100% with this description. And the only moment in the history of mankind that this idea have been removed from textbook has been only this 20 and in this nowadays. So
So we have that the ether is a medium, is the perfect medium, and that is like the canvas where we paint all the reality somehow. So we use that, and this permeates everything. And depending on how I do a perturbation of that ether, or I excite it, I'm going to have electric fields, and I'm going to see light, or I'm going to have magnetic things, or I'm going to have gravity, or I'm going to have different forces. So this is the unified field. This is what has been called in many different ways. So all the quantum physicists can be in peace, because there is something that is the ether that is saying exactly the same with a different name. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can use the old name and all agree in that. So then, depending on how this is perturbated, we can have different fields. We know the electromagnetic, more or less, we believe we know them. I don't know if we know them, but we believe we know them. Then we have the scalar. Then we have many other names that have been used for certain energies that we cannot directly measure with electromagnetic devices, because we can measure electricity with an electromagnetic or with an electronic device, but we cannot measure the scalar waves with an electronic device. We cannot measure the chi, the ki, the prana, the orgon. We cannot measure, and we have so many names at the other side of this energy. I mean, do you follow me, or am I just sometimes I just babbling?
Yeah, I'm following you.
Okay, thank you. So we have the electromagnetic, that is like the material part of that, is the one that we more or less know because we can measure with electronics. We can control that with electronics. But then we have this other aspect that you are talking of, this perturbation of the ether that creates other electricity, the one that is longitudinal, the one that we call scalar, the one that we call even orgon, if you allow me that. And there are so many words there too, because we have the torsion fields, and some people talking about the torsion fields as an entity totally different from scalar waves, or totally different from the orgon energy or things like that. Can you help us in that confusion of so many words for probably the same reality?
Yeah, I'll chip in there, because people have described the ether in a lot of different ways over the years, and just some note to add there. So Paracelsus referred to it as the archaeus. So that's Archaeus, archaeus, and he called it the living medium of divine will.
Wow, that's a next level, Steve. You are putting him on next level, because you are giving him properties of life, which is okay.
Yeah, the living medium of divine will. So, and it's also being called by shaman. It's been called the carrier of visions. So, when you're having a visionary experience, like, where are those visions? What medium are those visions manifesting within, right? Because you're not looking at the air because you got your eyes closed. Where is that medium? Well, ether's been described as the carrier of visions. So yeah, when we're in a visionary state of consciousness, I'm thinking about your children doing the blindfold, like seeing with the blindfold, right? It's like they're not seeing the air, right? It's like, so what are they seeing? You know, it's the ether. It must be the ether. Like, what else could it be? And just one note on with the Einstein thing. I found this as well, that in a letter to Shankland in 1954, Einstein said that if Dayton Miller's results are confirmed, then relativity collapses.
Yeah.
In other words, the dogma of empty space could not tolerate ether's resurrection. All right, so the whole of relativity and the idea of like empty space can't actually tolerate ether being resurrected from the grave, as it were, and they knew this. And as I said, they actually where Dayton Miller did his work, they took it down and they replaced it with a plaque in memorial of Einstein and Michelson, basically just covering up his work and putting their name over it. You know, so there's definitely some kind of I guess a war, some kind of war that's going on there for control over the ultimate explanation for reality, right? It's like it was ether, but now it's atoms and particles and space-time and all this kind of thing. So it was a revolution in physics. They tell us that it was like a paradigm shift, in our understanding. But it seems, I think there was a conspiracy there. It was not a natural, it wasn't a natural progress of understanding. It was, I think, a conspiracy to hide ancient knowledge.
And it makes sense because this has happened in many other fields too. This is something I've been also studying a lot because, for example, in medicine, we know that. We have the Flexner report, and suddenly in 1907, they change and they say, and you think that the knowledge we have now is the natural evolution of building up knowledge all the time. But no, it came a moment that they just broke everything and then just put something new there. And now that it's been 100 years later, you think you don't know that, but it was cut. It was copy and paste. Literally, it was copy paste, and then they say, or just cut and then put another thing there. And we believe that this is natural, but it's not. It has happened in most of the sciences that there was like a cut there, and suddenly they changed. So this is very important for everybody to know that the science we have today is not the normal evolution of building up knowledge over the time. It came a moment that was hijacked. And by hijacking, I mean that there was someone in the pilot, cabin that went and said, no, instead of going now to Istanbul, you are going to go to whatever, to Spain. And I'm sorry, I'm going to change the direction. And this is difficult. So let's come back to our thing. Can we agree that all these other words like we were saying the 0 point thing, energy and the black matter and all, even the torsion fields and the scalar waves and all this correspond to a, let's say, more or less the same reality that is here in this other way of perturbating the ether, and can be just different ways of similar, I'm not going to say the same thing, but similar realities, Artur? I know this is difficult for him because this question is very difficult for Artur because he's so accurate in everything he says that putting in the same bag so many different things can be difficult. But can we put them, grosso modo, in the same bag?
We can, but we should take into account some considerations because there's a classic alternative, revisionism of the ancient concept of the ether made by Tesla. And that was done by some great scientists like Eric Dollar and Tom Bearden, John Bellini, and Konstantin Mail in particular, these four scientists, four physicists, who, besides the fact that most of them consider that they are misinterpreting, and there are a lot of fights and the fight of egos and all these aspects, I like to be more constructive in the way that you can do that, what Anna said, but if you consider parts of of what these guys say, and they join together in a more in a wide and not narrow and dogmatic way, because there's also dogmatism in the alternative ways of soul physicists and science. And you know that that happens and in other aspects, not in physics, in medicine and in biology. There's
The
alternative ways,
dogmas.
but then there's fights and disputes between they want to interpret the things more purely, and they consider that you are misinterpreting or misinforming, and you are and even some people say that you are doing that deliberately. So
Yeah.
my
We just
my
need to think in viruses to understand exactly what you are saying, because even
yeah,
in the alternative sides, we have
yeah,
so many dogmas, and even if you say that viruses
exactly.
exist or they don't exist, you are wrong.
So
And you are going to
you-
be just controlled opposition. So we know that.
so my opinion is that you can rebuild or re-understand what Kozyrev said when he referred to
The torsion
torsion
field.
field. If you put in the same shoes of Kozyrev, and you try to imagine to live in the Soviet Union by the 50s, and after surviving to Gulag and being and observing that all your pals in the prison died of starvation. So some of these scientists had to pass through incredible difficult situations to achieve that results. They've been in the case of Eric Dollar, was living most of his life in a ban because he was persecuted and hijacked. And so I have to say that, because if I want to reply to that question, the answer is yes. We can join together the ideas of Mail and Kozyrev and Reich. Reich arrived to the same conclusions like Dayton Miller, as James DeMeo clearly stated. And he made a great job to see that Picardi's Italian chemist arrived to the same conclusions about the ether as Reich and Miller. So nowadays, in 2025, that you are in your house and you have internet in front of you and you can read all these papers calm, without no one or a black man who wanted to hijack you, or
Kill
Stalin
you.
who wanted to make you in prison and died of starvation. And I'm not joking. I mean, there's been a lot of difficulties to for alternative visions to arrive to these present moments. And now, actually, nowadays, with all these papers and books, we can arrive to the conclusion that yes, we can create a solid, unified theory, and by that understanding that what Kozyrev had to pass through and what Miller had to pass through, it was completely different. They arrived to the same conclusion. They must understand these people by understanding his life. And when we understand his life and his conclusions and the way and what they learn, we can say yes. But not everyone has the capacity or the ability to observe this puzzle and put the pieces inside and understand that some pieces were very hard to put inside that puzzle, because there's a lot of alternative visions of scalar waves that have disappeared. We don't know that. They disappeared. They're completely wiped up from the, like, for instance, the history of Ettore Majorama. So we don't know nothing about this man. He was Enrico Fermi's mm, Enrico Fermi said that he will be the greatest physicist, and he disappeared allegedly because he discovered some ways to transmutate matter, and he was persecuted, and then and he disappeared completely. And there's a lot of gossips and histories about that he survived. So what I want to say is that when I try to understand the history of these great men and try to put in their shoes and understand the circumstances that they had to face, some of them were extremely hard and difficult. I could say I could reply to that question, yes, but that needs patience, and that's what I try to do with my students. They say, well, in these sessions, we're going to see longitudinal wave, and we're going to understand the difference between the transverse and a longitudinal wave and the difference between a dielectricity and magnetism. And in the next chapter, we're going to see another aspect, and then another aspect, and then another aspect. And afterwards, maybe we can apply this to understand, for instance, biophotons, Fritz-Albert-Pop biophotons, because that theory helps you to understand this particular aspect. For instance, biophotons, or for instance, telepathy, as the Russians did. The Russians observed the science of Kozyrev, and then it came Kaznachev, who developed that ideas, and then he came up with the Kozyrev mirrors, which was not developed by Kozyrev himself, but was a great aportación. It was a great discovery for parapsychology.
So,
and the greatest Russian parapsychologists understand that there's some ways that can penetrate all the matter,
yes.
and that have a relationship with the ether, because they start to study Kozyrev theory and arrive to conclusions because they applied like physical equations to double-side experiments in parapsychology and transmission of thoughts.
The thoughts. And the Russian side is really amazing because they play other game. They totally play a different game. So we can say we have the ether, we have this substance. Depending on how we do perturbations or irritations or whatever you want to call it, we excite this substance. We are going to have the electromagnetism we know, the electromagnetism Tesla discovered, the vital force organ that Reich discovered, or the scalar waves that whoever discovered, and the torsion fields Kozyrev discovered, and everything that everybody's discovering, because all those are in this ether irritation that is not electromagnetic. That we can say more or less like a bigger picture.
More or less. And electromagnetic is hot ether.
Is?
And it's hot ether. We can say that it's hot ether.
Okay.
And that is cold ether, depending.
Yeah. Yes, because at the end it's not just one ether. Ether can have many different features or different, there are the 4 ethers, but we're not going to go so deep. I want to launch the last word, that is plasma. Steve, what is plasma? Because plasma can be the blood, liquid part of the blood. We know that, but this is a different plasma. Please don't confuse both things, because unfortunately, I've seen people confusing plasma as a state of matter, if you want to call it, and now you're going to describe that as plasma in the blood. Plasma in the blood is just a liquid phase in the blood. It's kind of, there's a liquids in the blood. This is different from the plasma. What is the plasma when we are talking about this state of matter or something?
Okay, well, I was going to say some stuff about scalar waves and orgonite as well, but we can come back to that, I guess. But
well,
you know,
as far as go where you want, Steve. This is free.
Well, okay. I'll come to plasma because it is a bit of a different conversation. I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying earlier about the scalar waves. My view of scalar waves, well, first of all, you're right to say that you know, we can't detect them with technology. And I started making orgonite many years ago, and people were saying, you know, that there's waves that this orgonite produces energy and stuff like that. But there was no one had any technological tools that they could use to prove that that was happening. But of course, then you realize, well, it doesn't affect the tech; it affects life. It affects water. So actually, water is the best tool for measuring scalar waves. And you know, one of the ways you can do it with orgonite, for example, is to put a piece of orgonite in the freezer with, like say, on the middle shelf, and then put a bowl of water or a cup of water on the top shelf above the orgonite, and then let it freeze. And what you'll find is that the water will freeze in a vortex. So you'll be able to see in the frozen water that it was getting pushed upwards. So the water will be domed on the top, like there was a force pushing it up, and also spinning. So it's like an upward rotating force, right? Which is what you'd expect with this, this torus field sort of shape. So I did this and confirmed that I saw people do it online. And I did it myself and confirmed I got the same effect. But then it occurred to me, well, our bodies are mostly water. So in fact, our bodies are actually capable of sensing scalar waves, but it's subtle energy, right? So it's not something we can usually feel, even though in principle, the liquids of our body should be able to detect this, this effect. So this led me to dowsing. I'd never actually done dowsing before, but one of the most effective ways to measure the ether, or at least feel the ether, is through dowsing. And you can use pendulum dowsing, or like, the metal sticks. Yeah. And it's an amazing feeling actually when, those sticks like pull together, just like, it's really exciting. And so this leads you to water, because the paths that that water takes through the earth are actually paths that the ether takes, right? It's like the ether blazes the trails, if you like, that then later become like the streams and rivers and all this kind of thing. The ley lines and all this kind of stuff, right? They're all the paths that the ether is able to take, like the path of least resistance. So you can, that's one way of measuring it. So it affects life, it affects water, but it doesn't really affect technology. That's why you can't measure it with tech. So the other way, so in terms of creating a scalar wave, well, quartz is used quite a lot. So quartz is a big component of orgonite, but quartz is also the most abundant material in the earth. And the alchemists would say that quartz was solidified ether, or like crystallized ether. Quartz has this piezoelectric property. So when it's squeezed or heated, it produces a scalar wave, essentially an electric field, and a scalar wave. So, when you're making orgonite, you put quartz in the orgonite, as well as copper coils and things like this. So a copper coil, like the Tesla coil, is an example of counter-rotating fields. So that's another way to create a scalar wave, is by counter-rotating fields. So two fields which are going in the opposite direction. With the Tesla coil, you've got two coils. You've got a big one at the bottom and a longer one in the middle of it, right? So you've got these counter-rotating fields. And I believe it can be done with mercury as well. They would use counter-rotating balls of mercury to create fields and these scalar wave fields and stuff in the past. Maybe they still do it somewhere, but I'm not sure where. So there's also the caduceus coil, which is the two counter-rotating copper coils. Again, this is said to produce a scalar wave as well. Now, in terms of, so the claim is that scalar waves are able to penetrate all matter, and they're also instantaneous. So that they don't travel, right? Because if a wave is instantaneous, then it's not traveling from A to B in a certain time frame. It's just there. Now, again, this is where it comes back to depends what model of Earth you're working with. So I believe in a geocentric, stationary, enclosed Earth. And so my view then is that scalar waves are actually like acoustic waves, right? Because if the Earth is an enclosed system, then it will have standing waves depending on its size, just like a room like this studio here has standing waves. So whenever I create any vibration, like say on my speakers or whatever, there are waves that just exist in this room. They don't travel. They just exist at all times due to the proportions of the room and the size of the room. They create standing waves like in the room. And so if we are indeed in an enclosed Earth environment, say a dome or whatever it is, then there would be standing waves in the Earth, because the Earth would be a resonant cavity. And so we have things like the Schumann resonance, right? So the Schumann resonance, they say, is just this vibration that's like always there, kind of like a, like this kind of thing, like a standing wave that's just like always present due to the, the shape and size of the space that we're in. So that's just the theory I have, of course, based on my view of Earth. Because things like standing waves don't really make sense on a planetary model, because all the waves would just go out into space, right? But if you're in an actual enclosed environment, then you would have standing waves and harmonics all throughout the world, really. So yeah, that's kind of my idea of scalar waves there. But to go on to plasma, so with plasma. The word is from biology, and it refers to the liquid component of your blood. That was the original meaning, and it was kind of pinched by physicists. And I think about 1930, it was taken and used as a word for this like hot, like superheated gas, basically superheated gas. And but when you go back to alchemy, so of course, physicists would tell you a plasma is made up of electrons, hot electrons, this kind of thing. But when you go back to alchemy, it's more about the properties. So it's not about what it's made from, it's about what are its properties. And the reason plasma is so special is because it's a perfect union of the solar and the lunar properties. So the solar being the electric light, so it's glowing, it's electric, but it's also liquid. It's like water. It flows like liquid and flows like water. And so this is said to be like the perfect kind of union of the electric solar energy and the magnetic lunar energy together. So something which is both electric, glowing, and flows and moves like water, and is also magnetic. So it's this union of like the fire element and the air element in perfect harmony.
So at the end, we have, again, a word to describe, I mean, forgetting about the plasma as the blood, because this is a liquid and this is a totally different assumption. So we have
no, actually, it's like as above, so below, right? So the plasma, like as a hot gas, is actually, it does relate to the plasma in the blood, because our blood is a combination of solar and lunar properties, right? It's warm, it's magnetic, it's it's electric, and it flows like liquid. So there's actually, so the word is well used as both a description of superheated gas, but also as the substance of your blood as well. It's like as above, so below.
Okay, that makes me confused. Because I see the plasma as a liquid that can have many properties and can have some, properties embedded. But when I see the plasma, as I see in the pictures, or in the, not pictures, but in the representations of this state of matter that is superheated, and that it doesn't have like, can you imagine that, or they describe like a cloud of charges or things like that, then I don't see that as a liquid, but probably it's just me. So
Well,
when
it moves like a liquid, but plasma moves like a liquid. That's one of its properties, but it's got a property of being electric and magnetic as well. And the blood is the same. I mean, it moves like a liquid, and it's also electric and magnetic. It sustains life. It's got iron in it and stuff. So there's a correspondence, but they're not the same. They're like one is like a more gaseous, and the other is more liquid.
But can we connect? How would we do a connection between this plasma and what we were talking about before, of ethers, scalar waves, or things like that? Is how do we connect that? Is another word for the same reality? Is a different reality? Is more material? Is less? More subtle? Where do we put that? I'm an engineer, so you need to understand that I need to put
Yeah.
things in boxes. So
Yeah.
if I cannot put it, if it's in two boxes at the same time, I cannot rest in peace. So I need one thing in one box.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to realize that plasma is generally it's a product of human labor, right? We don't really just see
Okay.
plasma just like kicking around,
Okay.
on Earth. But so the plasma in our blood is actually more, that's the more common type of plasma than the plasma from physics that we're talking about.
But they say in the
But
sun there is plasma because there is super high temperature.
yes, yeah. So, well, they say this, yeah, plasma coming out of the sun, which would be, superheated gas, basically. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I'm just at this point just trying to define plasma, but it's important to understand that the word plasma was actually like pinched from blood plasma. So blood plasma came first, that's the true plasma, and then physicists have used that name to describe a superheated gas as well.
Yeah. Artur, where do you put the plasma?
Well, first of all, this last intervention of Steve, I'm absolutely 100% agree with what he have expressed. He have summarized perfectly. Well, plasma if we go back to the original concept of Hans Halven, was the man who invented this idea and received the Nobel Prize, will be the photostate of matter, and that came is not solid, not liquid, not gas. And what happens is it behaves in the three ways at the same times. Because in a plasma, there's some, you can observe that there's fluids and moving of the matter. That's what we observe when we observe the sun. We observe these thermical conventions like rivers of matter in the sun, but it's solid, and at the same time it glows. So that means that it emits light and ultraviolet and infrared, etc. No, so what happens is that there's something that the ancients discover is that gas have entropical properties, meaning that gases tend to expand. But when temperature rises and entropy and the entropy should have to increase at the same way, there's a moment in which that collapses. And then it came up that the matter starts to be electrically not neutral, and the electrons or the positive and negative charges separate. And when that happens, the electromagnetic forces go or start to work in the opposite direction of the entropy. So some have considered that the plasmas and this is something that Kosyrev discovered, because Kosyrev said there's something very strange in the sun, in the sense that I measure all the time the same watts divided by centimeters or whatever you consider. You always observe the exact emission of electromagnetic energy from the sun, but we can observe that there are very different behaviors in the Earth, considering the sunspots and different climate situations and the affectation that the moon, the sun, and other and Mars and Venus and all these planets have to us, in the sense that we can observe that in agriculture and in the human behavior. There's a lot of correlation between the affectations that all these planets have to us, which absolutely demonstrated. And that cannot be described only by electromagnetic wave. And that was something that Kosyrev discovered. Said, when I look at the sun, I always observe the same quantity of energy, but there's a lot of differences. And it seems like this state of plasmas not only transmit energy, but at the same time can transmit information, because no one's know why in the hell every 11 years, north pole and south pole of the sun split and changed. There's a lot of things that we don't know. And what I consider is when we arrive to the state of plasma, which is not electric, high temperature state of matter in which the electric positive and negative charges separate and then start to collapse and all these aspects I have described, it happens more things that the physicists say. In particular, that besides the fact that the emission of the energy in electromagnetic waves from the sun remains constant by years and years and passes the years and they remain constant, a lot of changes happen in the earth by the astronomical influence of the sun, the moon, etc. So some would say that plasma is a way to arrive to a moment in which information starts to be important, and plasma should have to be the bridge between information or the field of information and the matter and the manifestation. So, because I also want to point out another thing that you said in your previous in your previous intervention, in which you say that the scalar wave have a lot to do with geometry, a lot to do with your geometry, and that we need to take this into account, because if, for instance, we take a transformer, we only have to know how much waves have to have the first coil and the other coil, and now we will see how much voltage or amperage we will have in the other side of the transformer, and that's very easy. But what happens with the Tesla's transformers, which uses scalar waves, geometry is not only the quantities of wings that you put in the primary and the secondary. No, it depends a lot with geometry. And then he came up with that idea that Anna said many times in his, have said many times in her interventions, that there's a triad between information, energy, and finally matter. So it seems like plasma is more than something that only achieve or express or manifestate the energy. It had a lot to do with geometry, and that was what Kozyrev asked himself by the middle of the 40s and the 50s. He said, there's something that all the physicists of the sun, and that man was the director of the Pulkovos Observatory in Leningrad, which, by the way, by those days was the greatest astronomical observatory in the world. And that man was put into account of that observatory when he was only 22 years old, and then came up Stalin and hijacked him and put in jail, and all this madness of this kind of dictatorship. But that was the greatest scientist of the Russian Soviet Union by those days. And he said, there's something strange in the sun that going more over the electromagnetic energy that we receive from that, plasma should have to have certain kind of properties that we are not taking into account, and that what they have to do with consciousness, the seasons, the way that the plants grow up. They grow up more or less depending on the lunar and sun influences. And that was something that Kozyrev take into account, because they say there must be something else related to plasma who's controlling this kind of, or at least making certain kind of influence into these aspects, with that important aspects of our life. So the cycles of our harvests, cosechas, en fin, no sé, me pierdo un poco, Ana María.
Yeah. So here I'm understanding one thing, and this is just my personal joy of connecting dots, because as I'm going to take my magic here.
Mm-hmm.
As Artur was saying, my model of reality is based on what physics says, that there are three levels. There is information, there is energy, and there is matter. Okay, we have always this, without the microphone, with the microphone and the rest. So we have these three things. Okay, so when it comes to energy, when it comes to energy, we normally say that electromagnetic fields are here down at the matter level, because we even say that there is a particle about that. Is the photon, or is the, in the electricity is the electron. We say this is like the materialistic. This is the original idea that comes from an intelligence. It doesn't come from error, or is not random. It comes from an intelligence. So you have this. And so as this exists, you need an idea. Then you need to put some forces, some energy that transform or create and give it shape. You need substance and shapes to have the matter. And this is how we use the things. This is how we destroy the things. You know, the fate of this is going to the garbage. It will come a moment pretty soon that doesn't write anymore, and I throw it. So this is the way we use, this is the way we learn, this is the way we destroy the things. So we have the electromagnetic is the way we use the things. That's what we can measure, because we have devices that we use, that we have created, that helps us. But above this, then we have the pure information that could be this magnetic thing, this magnetic Walter Russell white magnetic lights, and all this idea of the pure information. Then we have this middle part, the fate is going to go to garbage soon. This in the middle part, that would be like what we're talking about, scalar waves, or orgon, or chi, or ki, or prana, and all these other things that are still non-material, let's say, but we are going to use them and transform them so as we can use them. And that means destroy them. So when we are seeing electromagnetic fields, what we are seeing is how we destroy the ether to use it. Destroy sounds like pretty strong, but this is how I understand that. So now
Producing heat. I always say producing heat.
Yeah, okay. So now I'm understanding that there is like an interface between this ether. If we come back to that word to describe all that reality of things, there is like an interface between ether and matter that could be this plasma.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interface in which ether is getting material. Can we describe like that? Does it make sense, or I'm making a big mistake?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Because
yeah,
go.
Sorry.
Go, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, there's an alchemist that I talk about quite a lot called Robert Flood, and he had a whole conception of the cosmos. He talked about 4 different kinds of fire, and so at the highest fire is really what the plasma that you're talking about, what he called divine fire, pure plasma, and then below that is then celestial fire, which is the light of the stars. And then below that is then aerial fire, which is lightning or electricity.
Yeah.
And then below that is terrestrial fire, which is like flames in the campfire. So, you know, we see that it's like, yeah, like you were talking about, there's like a plasma as a mediator. I mean, I said back at the start, it was like the medium of the living medium of divine will. And, you know, this is where's the information coming from, right? It's like information. It's like information. So it's the structure, the inner structure of the matter, or the inner structure of the energy, even, you know, as we know with light, you know, for communication, right? It's like you're actually structuring the wave with the information. So yeah, I agree with this idea of plasma as being like like you're describing it, like the highest fire, or like the interface between the source of information, which we could call divine, and the, you know, the matter, or the different types of fire underneath, the lower kind of fire.
Yeah, because we cannot understand the ether unless we understand that it's not a uniform substance, that it has different qualities that we describe, or people describe, like the 4 ethers, like different qualities that this ether can have, because this is much bigger than just a word. I just want to point out, before I go to the last question for you both, that is that when we talk about the 4th phase of matter, we are not talking about the 4th phase of water that Gerald Pollack is talking about, because I've seen people talking about both things as if it was the same. And it's not the same. The fact that we use the word 4th phase doesn't mean that everything that is a 4th phase is the same thing. So if we can say solid, liquid, gas, and then plasma as a 4th, like more subtle way of having the same matter. When we talk about Pollack and the water, he's talking about liquid, being between liquid and solid. there is another interface that is jello-like, and this is what he says, the fourth phase. I just say that out loud because that was something that I've been hearing sometimes. So my last question for you both is, you were saying, Stephen, and I love that idea because that matches with all my beliefs. And we enjoy a lot, isn't it? When someone says something that matches with your beliefs, that's the biggest joy you have. That definition of the ether that you say, I think it was Paracelsus, that you say living medium of divine will. I love that. And the other one, the carrier of visions, because that connects with the ether with the memory. That is something that Rudolf Steiner also has connected. But not so much about the memory, but about life, the connection, because when people observe plasma, they say this fourth phase of the state, this overheated gas, they say it behaves as if it was conscious. And it's the same with the ether. We have always described the ether as a quasi or even directly living substance. And this is very interesting because it totally changes the picture. We are used to understand physics as the study of the inert things because we have biology to study life. So we separate between inert and alive, and we say, no, physics deals with the things that are inert. I don't want to say dead because
Dead matter.
to be dead, you have to be alive.
It is dead matter. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Physics deals with.
So physics works with inert things, but now the basis of physics is the ether, and ether is not inert. It's something that is conscious, is living. It behaves as a living thing. This is an observation that even the quantum physicists have done, and people that study plasma, they say it behaves as a conscious thing. It behaves as a living thing. So how can we connect these two things? Because I really believe that we live in a universe that is made of beings and not things. But that's my belief. Now you are telling me that the ether is a living medium.
Yeah.
How do we mix those things? Steve, go.
Well, okay. Well, the thing is, like plasma, as I say, is plasma is originally your blood, and like you say, it behaves like a living thing, right? You're talking about plasma behaving like a living thing. Well, we have plasma coursing through our veins, like keeping us alive, and obviously, yeah, Adam's done amazing work studying blood plasma and everything. But so yeah, I think. It is in us, is where the ether comes to life is through us, because you have the ether in the four elements, right? Fire, earth, air, and water. Now we're made of earth, okay? We have our bones, our teeth, our muscles, our tissue, our skin. That's all earth. We have water. We have, of course, blood, sweat, tears, like semen, cerebrospinal fluid. All these like waters as well. And we have air. We breathe air. In fact, the air, the blood plasma is the air. It's coming from the air. Every time we have an in-breath, we're vitalizing the blood. So there's this intimate connection between blood plasma and the air itself. And then we have fire in us, which is the light of our will, our divine spark, our heartbeat, our pulse. So we have the fire, earth, and air and water inside of us, but we're not solely fire, we're not solely earth, and we're not solely water or solely air. According to the alchemists, we are the ether. The ether is what we are, our consciousness. We sort of wear this suit of elements, if you like. We wear the earth, we wear the water and the fire and the air in order to come into, from spirit into matter. But our actual consciousness that we act from, the consciousness that commands the elements, right? We're able to, every time we move our body, part of us is commanding the elements in the body to respond. So really that part of us that commands, the part of us that witnesses our life, that would be the ether. And so really, the alchemists believe that the human soul has its origins in the ether. The human soul itself is an expression of the ether. And so, yeah, I think it does relate to blood plasma, which is, what keeps us alive and stuff as well. Yeah. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Steve. Go, Artur.
Well, I completely agree with Steve. And by the way, I truly recommend that you, if you want to read about this in a introductory level of this ancient concept of the four ethers, I truly suggest that you read an anthroposophical study that only is 30 pages. I guess you can read it in 1 hour by Ernst Marty, named The Four Ethers. I truly recommend that you
The
read
four
that.
ethers.
Ernst Marty,
Yeah.
The
Ah,
Four Ethers. It's 30 pages. It took me 1.5 years. Read it.
yeah,
Artur.
absolutely.
It took me
That's-
1.5 years reading those 30
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah,
But it's
Yeah, yeah.
amazing. It talks you about the elements, the ethers, the formative forces, and how everything is created. It's a really, really amazing book. But it took me a lot to understand that.
because there's certain moment in which I truly suggest that. So, because this conversation can go by hours, and we can summarize a lot of things that I don't know, Steve, but I'm absolutely uh, uh, um, convinced that he have read a lot of books as me and have practiced so much and studied so much. But there's such a moment in which I truly recommend that, go and make experiments, people. Uh, it's not a question to study and to it's not a philosophical or theoretical or mind.
Right.
I don't know the way to say that, but it's even in Spanish. So now we have. So what I want to say is that uh, go and make experiments. Go and make experiments in order to see this full ethos manifesting itself. Practice sensible crystallizations in which you will see the manifestation of the fire, air, water, and earth ether. And for instance, when I was in the Anthroposophical Society, we made an experiment that consists in slowly burn a leaf.
Leaf, a green
You know
leaf.
that, yeah,
Yeah,
with
it's
in
so cool.
Rudolf Steiner's house in Barcelona, and you will see that full ethers spreading. You will see
Yeah.
how
You put in a
the
tube, in a say tube, you put a green
exactly
leaf and you burn it very slowly. Is it closed or
very
is it
slowly.
open? I don't remember.
No,
If
no,
the
you have to
tube is open.
use, yeah, you have to use something to apantallar. I don't know the way to say that in
Screen,
English, to protect
screen.
a little bit, and then you have to have a hollow on the other side in order to let the water, the vapors,
Yeah.
and all these
So you can
stuffs.
use an say tube, a glass say tube,
Yeah,
and
you
put
can use,
the leaf, a green leaf inside.
and you
That's
will
super
see
cool.
this. Yeah, you will see this ethers spread. You will see that
You
water.
see the four ethers this getting
Yeah,
out of that leaf.
exactly. And you will see in the precise moment in which the leaf changes its color. And you need that, first of all, to remove all the water. And then you will see the moment in which you hear something like a crepitation. And now you will understand why one of these ether is called also the sound ether.
Yeah. That is
Because
connected
it
with the water.
exactly, there's water who produces sound. I said, I don't want to spoil or ruin your experiment. Please do that and make experiments, because anything else, you have to put it in a practical way and observe that, because we can extend this conversation by years. And finally, what we need is to experiment and see how or what was the true behind these ethers. And for instance, when Alistair Lowary, who was a Russian doctor, a woman who discovered the idea of sensible crystallization, because he was in Rudolf Steiner Anthroposophical Society. He started to make blood tests in order to see this manifestation of these four ethers in the blood, and he made more than 250,000 sensible crystallizations of blood. And he discovered problems of kidney, problems of lungs, and problems of different organs by the study of the correlation between the ethers, the sensible crystallization, and the diseases and the organs, etc. So there's a moment in which experience is the most important thing. So it is not really complicated, as Anna clearly stated. If you read the 30 pages of the four ethers of Ernst Marty, you will have worked for years.
Yeah.
For years. And
Yeah.
please go and experiment,
and that can
because there
explain.
are a lot of simple experiments in which you can see that, because I saw a lot of people just, thinking the ethers, and you don't have to think the ethers, you have to let the nature to show you their secrets and experiment.
Yeah, that is awesome, because, we see a lot of people doing cool things, super cool things, like Emoto started doing with the crystals, and then Veda Austin is doing an awesome work with these crystallizations. And if they understood that what they are seeing is that interface is like the water showing you the information that is in that ether, then that can add a lot to the picture of what we are seeing. It's a little bit what Steve was saying about the organizer. You put it in the freeze and you see the vortex in the water. Yeah, you are seeing the energy, so you are able to see more. And for me, that's very important, because the more we can see, if we understand and interpret correctly what we are seeing, that means more consciousness. And this is what we need. Consciousness grows when we can expand our observation. So this is opening a whole new way of understanding life by seeing the subtle part of that life. That is the part that is the non-materialistic part of life.
Exactly.
And this is what gives the key, because what makes us alive is not the materialistic part, is the other one. Adam, go.
So thanks. You saw my hand. Hello, everybody.
Yes.
So this really can help us make sense of why we're seeing the holograms in the blood.
I really believe so, especially because when you take the blood out of the body, then that blood starts dying. So somehow the ethers start separating too. So can be, and if the ether is the carrier of visions and is the carrier of memory, then what you are seeing is how this ether is manifesting a memory in a shape. And that is really interesting, but this is just a hypothesis we can continue working on. What are your thoughts about that? Because that is my thought, is like when you take the blood out and it starts leaving the body, so that means that those structures that create your body are starting like disintegrating a little bit slowly. That means that, yeah, it can be that what you are saying is that memory that is getting just expressed because it's disappearing. What do you think about that, Stephen? Does it make any sense to you?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, I suppose you're right. The blood, once it's taken from the rest of the blood, is going to start to undergo decay. I mean, I suppose it's okay. We know it's plasma, but it's not just plasma, right? Plasma is a component of the blood. But yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about these holographic images. And I mean, Adam and I talked about it briefly at Confluence. We were talking about the Star of David, right? Because the ether was symbolized by the Star of David, like before it was used for Israel and Zionism and stuff, all the way back to Aristotle, as far as I know, even before, the ether was symbolized by the six-sided star. And Adam had said that he'd actually seen these in the blood, seen these six-sided stars in the blood.
In the symbions.
Yeah, Dad saw, when Dad was with Naissance, his microscope was much more powerful than the ones we've had. And there were things they saw in there when they zoomed in on them, they were perfect six-sided stars.
Yeah.
And I realized that's two-dimensional, but that was an interesting connection. Who knows?
Yeah, and that made me realize that, well, snowflakes are always six-fold symmetry. Even though every snowflake is unique, it always has a six-fold symmetry. And really the six-sided star is like the sort of perfect representation of an ideal six-fold symmetry. So yeah, so it's interesting that we see that like water tends to freeze into a six-fold symmetry. And this is how ether is represented symbolically. So I don't know, it's just an interesting connection there.
It's an interest. It
Yeah.
is, and as we look at things historically, and we see that the connections have been severed for us. Um, this one is interesting. His goal was to prove that the soul and consciousness exist in the blood. And if nothing else, Judaism and soul, Star of David, and that's the soul. Seeing these things in the blood, it lines up with Emoto's love and gratitude crystal and the Metatron's cube. So there's something consistent there, if nothing else. And Anna, it's listening to you guys is intense because I'm trying to hold my own, trying to stay above water with it. But the simple idea of Anna with your information, energy, and matter, if the ether is, there's information there, there's energy there, the blood is communicating, there's the plasma, there's a connection there with a liquid of sorts. So I think that this makes total sense as to how we can see the holograms in the blood. Whether I know they're not in the in the bloodstream, whether or not things are starting to die and that's what's starting to manifest at that point, I'm not quite sure. But if nothing else, the ether connects connects a lot of dots for us.
And what we know is that that is an interference pattern that we can see and that the cells feel. And so that means that it has to have like an electromagnetic or at least an electric or magnetic difference in charges, because you see how the white blood cells, they come immediately, boom, and they attach to it, and they draw the shape that you are seeing when theoretically there is nothing there. So what do you think about this hypothesis, Artur? Does it make any sense what I'm saying, or I'm just babbling again?
No, it makes perfect sense. But uh, we have to take into account that all salts crystallize in different way. And in the ancient concept of salt, we have sulfur, which has nothing to do with the sulfur of the periodical table. The mercury as well have nothing to do. There's a subtle spirit that incarnates through a soul, not a spirit, a soul, who dropped from the in a hierarchy from the remote universe and then came up and arrived to that. I'm explaining more or less what Marty Einstein said about there's a hierarchy, and then it comes to a soul. The soul is the moment in which it manifests in our reality. The soul is a container of the salt. Sorry, the salt is a container of the soul. Sorry, it's uh, uh, so now we know that all the salts crystallize in different way. In particular, copper chloride, who was used by in
Sensitive
crystallizations,
crystallization.
it have a particular way of crystallize that we can see the full ethers more easily than other salts. But other salts have other properties and crystallize in different way. And probably what we are observing when we are witnessing these holograms in blood are souls from a soul who crystallize in different ways, because all souls crystallize in different ways, all of them. And you can make a meditation and crystallize your blood or your urine or your saliva or any kind of body fluid. You will observe that after a meditation of 10-minute meditation, it changes dramatically that crystallization. So all the crystallizations are different, all the salts are different, but all of them, as the ancient alchemists said, are a manifestation of the soul or the spirit, the soul, and then the salt, which is the sulfur, the mercury, and finally the salt. So from that, what I want to say is that in all the ancient cultures, we have said that the soul is embedded in the salt. And probably what we're witnessing is the soul of the salt.
That's awesome.
So this
What?
is interesting. Wait, hold on a second. Sorry, this is interesting. So as my mind is tiny mind trying to put some dots together here. Ether, information in ether. All right. So if something's going on, trauma, whatever goes on with us, there is information, morphogenic fields, things like that. Then salt, potentially, something that if nothing else we know conducts electricity, things like that. I know that much. Potentially information, energy, the salt conducting the energy is creating the matter of the hologram. Would it, does that make sense? And then would it be beneficial for whatever reason to isolate one of these holograms and have someone try to see what it's actually made of?
Yeah, that would be awesome if we could do that. But
I
Does
mean,
does
the
that make
ho-
sense? What I said?
isolating the hologram, I mean, that's a tricky, yeah, I mean, that's a tricky thing. It's like
tricky.
isolating a dream or something, you know, but
Well, we see white cells attaching to them, Steve.
yeah, we see
you
the
see
white
white
cells.
cells attaching to the holograms.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Wow.
We have
they see
videos.
it and they go, Jew, they go and they just surround it.
Yeah. There's a purpose
Amazing.
there. It's very, I get
Yeah,
chills
so
with these things.
I was thinking how you only have holograms of the broken part of the body, right? Or the part that needs
Yeah.
healing.
Well, what needs attention? Because we'll
What needs
see,
Attention, yeah.
we'll see the fetus, and it's not that the fetus is a broken thing, So
Yeah.
yeah, what the body wants
But
you to make sure
it
you're
needs some
conscious of.
attention. But it won't show you like a healthy part of the body, just like a healthy set of teeth or something that needs nothing done, right? It's showing you something that needs attention, or so I think that's quite interesting because that tells me about like harmony and disharmony. So let's say the hologram's not going to show you that which is harmonious and working normally. It's only going to show you that one part that's like disharmonic or distorted or out of balance or whatever needs some attention, like you say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that makes me think of music and like
Dissonance.
dissonance and this
This
kind
is
of thing.
well, and Stephen, he's new to some of our work, but the idea of there's the symphony that happens. All matter is vibrating at its own frequency, whatever is going on. It's a beautiful symphony. If something's out of balance, then it creates a dissonance, a disturbance field, interference field, and that's what we're seeing. You guys can explain more. Josh and I can only say holograms or holographic images are created by splitting a beam of light, refraction happens, and you're taking a picture of an interference field. So our microscope splits the light, and on that blood slide, we have the interference field from the blood.
It's like a mini Michaelson-Morley experiment. I mean, they did the same thing, right? They split the beams and recombine them, and then look at similar thing, similar process. But
wow, does that make sense, Artur? Is it? I mean, this is the first time I've heard Michelson, so
Yeah, like a recombination of the soul and the spirit, maybe the information and the energy, the two aspects, the feminine and masculine, probably.
Wow.
Probably, but
so I think that instead of holographic blood, you should call it like alchemy, something like that.
Etheric imaging. What do we call it?
Yeah. By the way, Adam, your camera has turned off, and I don't see you.
Oh,
there's always a correlation between odor and the level of energy or bioenergy. Always. There are a lot of exceptions in the rules, but there's some rules that try to always maintain, and that's a correlation between the odor or the level of crystallization and the fractalization of the crystal and the level of energy of the person. And so, but I think that we are witnessing with holograms something that have to do with the state of the soul, because all the diseases came from the soul. At least is what Paracelsus said. So
awesome. So, guys, this has been awesome. I don't know if you have enjoyed that or not.
I enjoyed it so much.
I have enjoyed
very much so. Thank you. Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to give like 10 minutes questions. if
Sure.
someone there wants to ask anything to these two awesome scientists. So if you want, you can raise your hand.
Well, and I want,
Because
and yeah, and as you guys, you can raise a hand or put some questions in. You can look at the chat maybe.
raise is always.
But yeah, I want to say, yeah, thanks to you guys. You know, it's when I met you, Artur, when Josh and I met you, it was awesome. You know, to have you talk to us about what you were writing about Dad and the books and how he's connected with things was great. And it was a wonderful conversation. I can remember standing there with you and Josh, and within about 2 minutes, I had no idea what you were talking about. It's very, very deep and intellectual, but you've always brought it back down to earth for us, and I really appreciate that. And Stephen was an interesting one too. Meeting you at Confluence was, you know, I go out and I meet people, and sometimes there's that one or two people that, for some reason, we kept running into each other. We met you when we first got there. We just kept running into each other, you know. So there was something there, and I appreciate having both you guys as resources to bounce some of these things off of. You know, to sit and listen to this conversation. There was a part of the time I'm texting Josh and saying, I don't know what they're talking about. But this really has, if nothing else, for I think all of us listening, the ether connects a lot. And I do think that it's nice that these things are coming back around. And I was looking something up, you know, because we've always loved Einstein, and I won't keep this too long. Dad looked like Einstein, and Dad actually had Einstein's eyeballs in his desk as an eye surgeon. Very interesting, right? Unique character.
Creepy.
Yes, creepy. But to be able to, you know, make the connections and see, I saw somewhere that Einstein said at one point, like Pasteur potentially said, that there is something in the ether. Where Pasteur said, you know, there is something in the terrain. It's not just the germ. So I like to think in the end that this is the time for us to really make these connections. So I want to say thanks for you guys. I'm curious as to questions people have, but I got exactly what I needed out of this. We have a little more sense made of the holograms. Stephen, I'm excited to talk with you more about, you know, what we do and have you dive into that. And ideally, it's going to connect more and more dots for all of us. You know, so wow, thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, you're very, very welcome. Yeah, really excited by your work as well. As I say, I hadn't learned about it before I met you, and I feel like the terrain thing, the whole understanding of terrain is just leveled up since I started looking into your work. Because I've been saying in my presentation, I've been saying we are the Earth. You know, in terms of defining, you know, that we are made from Earth. You know, we are the Earth. But of course, the word terrain actually means Earth, doesn't it? It means like land. You know, Earth. You know, so it's like we are the terrain. And you know, I think that what you're doing with terrain medicine, it just makes so much sense to me, and it's really been very illuminating and you know, clarifying my own understanding of the body as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to learn more from you and yeah, talk some more on all this.
He's on the team. We got to get him a team T-shirt now, right? Cool.
Yeah. So, David, do you want to ask something? David Parker, just open your mic.
Now maybe you can hear me.
Yeah.
I guess this one's for you, Artur, because we've only met once quite some time ago on a video chat, you may remember, but I seem to remember that you're very familiar and quite an expert on Wilhelm Reich's work. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And several times orgon has been mentioned in this discussion, and I wondered if you agreed that orgon energy and the ether are one and the same. Would you agree they're the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's when past time and you observe Reich's work with certain distance, you will see that Reich described two kind of behaviors. That was the mechanical discharge, who was, in his opinion, correlated to second law of thermodynamics, and that's why he hired chemical student who was McCulloch, who with time became one of his greatest or more relevant students and supporters of Reich's work. And then the organ, which is something that goes against second law of thermodynamics, in the sense that creates
Order.
it order from, but creates dipoles and is the energy related to the creation of dipoles. Meanwhile, the mechanical discharge is the energy related to the discharge of dipoles, and with that producing heat. And in the first, this order is can be expressed by an energy that is cold. That's why there's a lot of relationship between cold electricity and organ energy, and a correlation that we have seen, especially in high voltage. But when you study, when you put a, when you study the ancient concept of the ethers, you see that there are four ethers, and you have to take into account not only hot and cold, which hot meaning entropy and cold meaning negentropy or contrary to entropy. You also have to take into account wet and dry, and the ancient concept of the ether. So what I consider, in my opinion, is a personal opinion, if Reg could, in that moment of that, in that moment when he arrived to Organon by 1948 and start his research more profoundly in orgone, especially in nuclear energy and the atmospherical orgone, would led him to the cloudbustering and all these stuff that we know. If by those days he could get into some anthroposophical or maybe certain kind of vision of the ancient concept of the ethers in this more traditional or more based on this idea of the four ethers, he will probably not change his main opinions, but probably modularlas. ¿Cómo sería esto, Ana María?
Modulate them to
Modulated them. Because I always felt that Rage was someone who was all his life seeking for initiation, for such a kind of initiation in not esoterical aspects, but he was a great seeker, a man with a capacity to investigate, to seek for the truth, with an incredible energy. But with time, if he could by those days try to observe in more detail the kind of ether that he was discovering, he will see that there were some subtleties inside this ether who led to the ancient concept of the four ethers, and not the concept of pro-life ether and pro-death ether, meaning by that organ and door energy in equilibrium. That schema is correct, but I think, in my opinion, if that Rage witnessed from certain point of view that there were more to say about this composition of the ethers.
Yeah,
And
I think if I, sorry if I can just interrupt, because my understanding is, I mean, Reich died in prison in 1947, I believe, but his work was carried on, and one of the main exponents of it was Dr. James DeMeo, and I've certainly seen much of his work, and he seems to be in no doubt that the ether and orgon energy are the same thing. Would you like to comment on that?
yeah. The ether, which is, so I think that he observed that there are two ethers, door and organ, who came from a primordial energy and split in two. Because in the first versions of, for instance, if we go to the famous article of 1942, the discovery of the organ, it's not clear in that article if he was speaking about the ether as the organ, meaning by that the pro-life ether, or two. But afterwards, in some of his research and latest papers, he discovered that orgon and dwarf were two kind of ethers, all of them correlated. And that came from a primordial energy. And there, some of his papers, he stated that there's one primordial energy that is split in two, but the two energies are ethers, different kind of ethers, mechanical discharge or Thor, and orgon or uh, um, contrary to second law of thermodynamics, ether. It's my opinion because it's never pretty clear, but we have to take into account a lot of things. That man was persecuted by FBI. By those days, it did not exist computers. And when he wrote an article, sometimes he made mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes. For instance, he said that the samples of radium that nuclear society providing him to make the famous experiment of Orenur was only 1 micrograms, which was milligrams. There are a lot of mistakes in the Reich papers that were logical mistakes, because by those days it was not like this present moment. And I think that he from the first version of the organ described in the pendulum experiment of 1943 that he made up in New York, and the latest interpretation of the organ from the clubmastering, I think that he was aware that there were two ethers, the hot and the cold, and all these two came from a primordial ether, and then is where he drove that symbol in which one became two, but all of these two were ethers in the same way, opposite way, but different ways. But probably someone by reading Reich words would interpret different things. And by those days, Reich had to write in English, but he was German. And if you read the translation of, for instance, the Bion experiment, you will see differences between translated that from German to England or translated to Spanish. So there's misconceptions that normal was the translation of the books, but that's my personal opinion. At the first time, he was a little bit confused, but at the latest part of his life, he clearly saw that these two ethers were correlated, but were different.
But he definitely believed, I think, that what he called orgon permeated everything, all life, all the cosmos, whatever concept people might have, in the same way that ether does. It permeates all life. So there are great parallels between them. And just because I know it was mentioned, I think Steve mentioned it, that we don't have any tech devices to measure the ether, but Wright did develop an instrument, and we have a modern day version of it. And I have one just on the other side of my desk where you can measure organ energy. So if organ energy and the ether are the same thing, then we do have something where we can measure that energy. And I have measured it in various instances. It does work. So
does work.
that may be something of interest to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
That's true.
I mean, I'll just come in quickly. I say, yeah, I agree. I mean, it is the same thing. I mean, it's everything is ether. So, you know,
Yes.
you know, the idea would be that the orgon is a type of movement of the ether. And, you know, he got the word orgon from actually the word orgasm, right? It's like it's you know, and he wrote about how it was actually it related to the sexual energy. And I talk about this in my book because you create the orgone fields, or Reich was creating the orgone fields by mixing organic and inorganic materials in alternating layers. And when you get into the alchemy of it, you realize, well, the organic materials are feminine materials because they're of Mother Earth, and the
Well,
inorganic
those Steve, were
masculine.
what he called orgon accumulators. So the
Yeah.
orgon, he wasn't creating orgon; they were accumulators
Accumulating.
by
Yeah.
mixing different layers together. So
But it's
anyway, this would be a very long discussion, which I don't want to hog the whole thing, but I just wanted to propose that so that people could perhaps find out a little bit more about orgon energy, because it's a fascinating subject, and ether. I do believe they are one and the same, but they can manifest in different aspects, as all energy, because everything is energy, isn't it? That little understood what energy actually is, but it manifests in different ways. And one thing which is, of course, a great fascination to me is consciousness. And I say consciousness with a big C, not the little human consciousness. And of course, that would be another big discussion to discover how consciousness manipulates organ energy stroke ether into the manifestations that we see in this realm that we call physicality. But I'll leave it at that because that would take another week to
Yeah.
discuss.
Yes, that is going to be another webinar, but I think it's been perfect.
And I love that
David.
question.
Yeah, we all love that question too. This is just been the introduction, so be ready for a next one. But I think I think this last expression can explain many things or can wrap up the things. Everything is ether, but the ether is moving or is stimulated or is perturbated or is excited or whatever word you want to use in a different way. So there's different ways of moving the ether or transmitting the ether. Not transmitting is not the right way, the right word, but movement. There's different kinds of movement of the ether is what determines the different names we put the different energies, orgon and scalar, and then electromagnetic in another octave. So yeah, I think that we can wrap up with that saying everything is ether. The ether can be moved or can move in a different way. And that's why we have so many words to say that, because unfortunately, we didn't get that everything is the same nature and it's just different perturbations of that nature that gives the different things we are seeing, we are observing. So I think that we can let it here. It's been 2 intense hours of this healthy scientific discussion. This is what we love. Discussing means putting clarity in the things, trying to remove inconsistencies and getting closer to the truth. This is what we love. So thank you, Stephen, for being here. I don't know if you want to say a last word.
No, I'm great. Thank you very much. It's been really enjoyable, and I hope we'll have more interesting discussions in the future.
Sure. You are invited. And thank you, Artur, also for coming here. For Artur, I appreciate a lot your deep knowledge and also your effort to speak in English, because I know that for us, for you and for me, it's not our native language, and sometimes we can have some difficulties in translating some ideas. So thank you for this double effort.
Now, sometimes it's difficult because even in Spanish, it's difficult to explain that thing. You have to have another input to resolve, which is translate that idea that you don't have clear in your mind, even in Spanish, try to translate into English. Sometimes you feel like you're a little bit dumb or stupid, but it's not the case. Sometimes I have to think so much in Spanish what I want to express and then translate it to English. So it's another layer of difficulty.
Yes,
But
and he
thank
lives
you
in
so much.
Portugal, so he also has to speak Portuguese, and then
Yeah.
he reads French, so he has
And
like
my
a
mother
mix
is
of
French, and I
languages.
was born in Barcelona, in which we speak in Catalan. So
So he has 5 languages in the head at the same time. He needs to pick the right word, which is not
not
so
easy,
easy.
not easy. But I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure to meet you, and David, and Adam, and Ira, and I know is there. Thank you so much for being here. It's been very stimulating, and I hope that one day I can explain these things in an English course in
Yes.
Living University.
We are
Because
working
there's
we are working for translating Artur's materials into English, because Artur has a really broad knowledge. about the scientific new paradigm. I'm sure you too, Steve. So we also invite you. You have, I don't have your book here. I don't know why I cannot find it, but please talk to us about your book.
Oh
Just,
yes.
let's do
Well,
some promotion.
here it is. Yeah, A Fool's Wisdom. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it direct from me if you'd like. If you'd like a signed copy, you can get it on my website, which is stephenyoung.uk. Yeah, it's been out for a bit over a year now, and it's been at #1 in the philosophy of science charts on Amazon many
Ooh,
times,
you.
knocking Rupert Sheldrake and people like that off the top spot, which is always quite nice. But
Yeah,
uh,
awesome.
yeah, so
Do you have one there that you can show us the cover so as we recognize that? Go, Fool's Wisdom. Good. So here you have Stephen's book, and Artur's books are in Spanish. So we will have to do something to translate that, at least to translate your books into English in a quick way. I think this is something we can help to
I'm
do. So,
currently my book is currently being translated into Spanish. Actually,
awesome.
the translation is complete. It's just being reviewed at the moment. So I have another Spanish lady reviewing it. But so yeah, I should have a Spanish copy of it within a
Yes.
month or two. I would say.
Awesome. So let us know that we will share that with everybody. And Artur, you and I, we have to work in translating your books. He has a whole collection of Magna Ciencia that is awesome, but we only have it in Spanish. So this is a priority, Artur. Let's translate that.
Let's do
Okay.
that.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I commit here in front of everybody to help you to do that. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for being part of this discussion. And I hope we are going to organize more pretty soon. But for today, it's been enough. Thank you very much, Artur. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, everybody. Have an awesome solstice, that we are in the summer or winter solstice. So have a nice Sunday. Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Hasta luego.